All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my talk, Build Your Home Cockpit with Open Source. I'm really excited. I'm doing this remotely. It's a little bit weird because I cannot see any one of you. I hope some of you are on site. I hope that all the others that had to stay home and are joining remotely are safe and can still enjoy this presentation. Thanks, guys. Also, Evan from the team for allowing me this great opportunity to do this talk. So a little bit about me. My name is Sebastian. I'm the creator of Mobiflight, and I'm also the main contributor to Mobiflight, which means I'm doing this coding and all this stuff like, managing the community and so on and so forth. In real life, I'm an aviation enthusiast. I have a commercial pilot license with an instrument rating, and I also do fly out of Europe because I'm from Germany. I have an EASA PPL private pilot license here. I'm 42 years old. I have a computer science degree, which explains why I know about coding and kind of this electronic stuff a little bit. And yeah, as I said, I'm an aviation and flight simulator enthusiast. I'm doing flight simulation for probably since 2007 or so, which is around about 14 years by now. Okay, and last but not least, and very important for this talk, I'm also a open source supporter. What I would like to point out real quick is that we have a poll running that everyone can respond and is invited to respond to. So it would be really nice if you take a look at the polls that I have put up in for this talk. And also, I believe we will have some time at the end of the presentation. So please use this Q&A feature, hit the ask button and submit a question if you like, so I can take this and I will read them out at the beginning, at the end of the talk, of course. Okay, so now let's head over to the presentation and the content. It's about home cockpit building and open source. So what exactly is a home cockpit actually? Well, in the first place, a home cockpit is really the urge to get rid of the mouse, because it's such an immersion breaker. If you are flying your sim with your yoke and then you want to turn on the lights or want to dial in some other radio frequency, then you have to grab your mouse and interact with the cockpit. And it's just so annoying. It really is not a lot of fun. It's sometimes also really hard to find the click spot where you can interact. So this is really one of the main motivations for you to get rid of the mouse. And also, it doesn't have to be complicated. And typically it starts out with the light switches. I've seen this for myself, with friends, with other people who build cockpits. It's really about starting out with lights or maybe the autopilot control. And you can see on this picture that doesn't have to be like super fancy. You need a printed like a label or sheet of paper, and you put that on a panel and you drill holes into it and you put in your switches and your LEDs and you're good to go. And you hook this all up to your computer and you don't need a mouse anymore to actually interact. And that's really cool. And it's so much better than using a mouse because the immersion and you can really stay inside of this flight sim situation. This is one of my first panels that I created. As you can see, it's not pretty. I still just have it for historical reasons. And yeah, it's a auto brake panel for Boeing 737. I didn't have a way to drive the flap through a motor at that point in time and just used LEDs to indicate this, some switches. Yeah, awesome. It still worked. And I was very proud of having built this panel. Then you can see that people are stepping up their game and they're becoming like more creative and build more complex and more high fidelity things. And they put up an entire radio stack, and then they built their auto panel and so on and so forth. And then, they go beyond and they use 7-segment displays and LCD displays to display all this information that you typically would require on a flight sim flight. And yeah, you see, there's so many things, so many stuff where you do not have to turn your head around, where you don't have to grab your mouse to make modifications to the state or manipulate the controls of your plane. There's a lot of skill. People start with this first and simple basic stuff, but then they get hooked up on the idea of building more advanced things, and then they get additional tools, and we're going to talk about this a little bit. And then they end up doing all this cool stuff. This is all do it yourself. Yeah, it's not bought, and they end up building their entire Boeing 737 cockpit, which I just find it's so crazy to see this bandwidth, yeah, between a simple panel that everyone can put together up to the highest level of fidelity and accuracy. It's really, really cool what you can build today. And yeah, we're going to talk about what does open source has to do with this? How can open source help? And before we go into this question, we actually ask ourselves, what is open source? Okay. Open source is a little different from free software. Yeah, so free software is not necessarily the same as open source. Open source has some other characteristics, but open source typically is free. Yeah, so free software is not always open source software, but open source is typically free. Open source allows you and everyone else and whoever wants to take a look at, it allows or gives access to the sources. So that's really, really cool. Imagine you can take a look at all the code that is under the hood, and that provides some cool possibilities. Yeah, so this actually allows you to review and see what is going on, what the programmer has put in. Is there maybe some weird stuff that they're doing in the background that I should know of, and so on. So it's really, really cool, but obviously not everyone is willing to share their code with everyone else. But if it's open source, then that's one of the main characteristics. Another thing is open source really invites people to actually copy the source code and make changes to it. So that's also pretty cool. That's something unheard of many years of, unthinkable like many years ago, that someone would just put their code out and allow everyone to make changes and also like copy it, fork it. That's what it's called. Because typically people want to kind of, yeah, they're very conservative about IP, but open source is obviously exactly the opposite. And the last one is also pretty cool because open source typically gives you the permission to distribute it. So this means you can take the original software product or hardware product or whatever that is open source, or it could also be an image, a picture, and you can make changes to it, and you can actually also redistribute it. You can brand it with your own name, but typically they will say that you have to give credit to the original author and mention them in some documentation and these kind of things. But isn't that really, really cool? Open source is not only free, it is really about, here's the source code, take a look at it. If you want to collaborate, that's also, everyone is invited to collaborate. You can make changes, you can take it for your own project or whatever, and you can even distribute it. That's really, really awesome. Before we go into how to build a home cockpit, I'm going to take a quick look at one of the polls that I had put up. And the question was, do you have a home cockpit or additional devices? It was pretty cool. We got 38 answers, and 23 out of them are yes, and 15 are no. So that's really interesting. That's really, really cool. So like 2/3 say, yes, I already have a home cockpit or at least some devices, and 1/3 of the audience right now, they might actually ask this question to themselves right now, how to build a home cockpit. So on the one hand, you have like all these switches, and you think about like there's a master caution light, there's some annunciators in the plane, and on the other side I have my flight sim. So I have a Microsoft Flight Simulator, or maybe I'm more like an X-Plane 11 user, or I have prepared 3D, or maybe some older ones like FSX and FS9 or whatever. So how do I actually get these two things connected to each other, right? So it's fairly easy. You need I/O cards, input-output cards on the one hand, and you need PC software that is capable of interacting with the I/O card, and the switches and the lights and all these devices that are attached to the I/O card. Yeah, they have to be managed, and they have to be also like if a signal is sent from any one of those, then the PC software has to actually translate this signal and inform the flight simulator so that if I flip the switch, that also the flight simulator switch is going to get flipped. And the other way around, if the annunciator goes on in my plane in the sim, then a signal has to be sent so that an LED or a lamp or whatever goes on and is in the same state. Well, now you're going to say, well, wow, I'm a pilot. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a programmer. How do I do this? Yeah. And this is really cool. Don't worry, because there is something really cool where open source comes to the rescue. So open source here is Arduino, and it's Mobiflight, the software or that project, that platform that I'm building. They together, they can actually solve this very fundamental issue, this very fundamental problem that you have to figure out if you want to build a home cockpit by yourself without buying all those components pre-built, because here the objective is really to make it yourself and very like come to your own individual home cockpit. Let's take a look at the Arduino first. Okay, so what is Arduino about? Arduino is an open source hardware project. So we're not talking about software and coding, we're actually talking about open hardware. And also open hardware is something that is relatively new. It's actually, I don't know exactly the date when they founded Arduino. I should probably have looked this up before the talk. But anyways, I would say it's probably most 15 years or so old that there's an idea that people would share their designs with anyone on the planet, right? Because typically when it comes to hardware, people are very protective about the intellectual property. They don't want anyone else to understand how things work under the hood. They don't want to get copied and all these kind of things. But here we have the exact opposite. And it's so cool because now everyone can build these cards. You know, Arduino is an open source hardware project. There's specs, there's data sheets, there's build plans, there's everything. There's a bill of materials so that you know what goes into this card. And the Arduino project, they themselves, they are manufacturing these products and they also put them out. So it's probably a good idea to also buy the boards from them and support the project or donate or so. But at the same time, open source also has the effect that prices go down because just more people know how to build it and they can, sell it. So if we look at an Arduino Mega 2560, which is a very capable card for doing this interfacing stuff, yeah, because you have 68 input-output pins, which means you can use these 68 things, for example, to drive 68 LEDs or 68 buttons or so, roundabout. So, and this all costs like $10 or even a little cheaper, maybe. The original one is about like $30, but anyways, those work the same and makes it very affordable for you to get your feet wet in building home cockpits, right? Because at this point, like think about $10 is really not a whole lot. Okay, so the second one was, now that we have figured out the electronics part where we can attach the devices to, the other part is where you connect these I/O cards to your computer. And there is something, you need this flight sim connector. And hey, wow, awesome, there is Mobiflight. Mobiflight really helps you to comes with a special firmware that can be uploaded very automatically and very easy to an Arduino. And then it allows you to configure a lot of stuff. Let's take a look real quick at Mobiflight, where that came from. So Mobiflight is an open source project. It is compatible with Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. It's compatible with Prepare 3D, X-Plane, FSX, and FS9. And it uses Arduinos, especially the Arduino Mega that I just showed before, because it's really nice board with a lot of capabilities. And the really cool thing, or one of the promises of Mobiflight, is that you do not have to have coding skills, especially in the beginning. It's all done via with your mouse. You can configure and do this. You don't have to be like a nerdy computer geek who knows all that stuff inside out. It really opens the door and invites everyone to take a stab at home cockpit building, even if you are not a very skilled like electronic person or computer pro. It allows you to connect really cool things. So with these current devices that we have on our list, you can really build some amazing things. Yeah, so it allows for simple outputs, which means you can turn something on or off, which typically in a home cockpit is an LED. An annunciator goes on, the landing light indicator is a good example. All these kind of things are LEDs that you want to turn on and turn off based on the current state in the sim. Then you also have 7-segment displays. 7-segment displays is like something, and we've seen this before on the other picture. It's very typical. We typically have it on a radio stack. So that's where 7-segment displays are used, or in an autopilot panel where you can dial in your heading, your autopilot speed, and all these kind of things, typically displayed on a 7-segment display. Then we have servos. Servos are really cool also because you can make flap gauges or these kind of things. And stepper motors are also very interesting. They're very fine and precise, and you can also do you can build gauges like an airspeed indicator. It's a really simple thing to do with a stepper. It moves really nicely and slowly and smoothly. So it's awesome. Yeah. And then LCD displays are those text displays where you can have really a lot of freedom also through Mobiflight, to decide what do you want to display on this LCD display. So it could be engine parameters. It could be also radio frequencies. It could, you just think of it, if it's available as a value from the flight sim, you can very likely read it from there and put it out on an, display it on an LCD display. And one of the most recent features that we also added is shift registers. So shift registers actually expand the number of output pins and increase them so that you can even hook up more LEDs, simple outputs in this case. And that makes, like if you think of the flaps indicator on a Boeing 737 where you have all these different LEDs show up or so, it makes it really easy to create those kind of things. On the input side, you can think of buttons. Any button, any on-off switch or whatever you want to connect, it is supported by Mobiflight. You can think of encoders that you have on a radio panel, and also analog inputs. So like potentiometer you can connect, and then you can read the value from this. This allows you to build maybe a panel dimmer, a throttle control, or whatever you want to build with more like analog input ranges. And what is also really cool, and it's going to get released tomorrow, that's my plan, and it's already available on a Mobiflight beta, that joysticks are now supported. And that's really cool, because now you can not only configure Mobiflight devices with all the logic that Mobiflight provides, because it's not always straightforward to say, just, I want to hit this button and then something has to happen in the sim. You have to build some logic around it, like when the battery switches on or off, then maybe your 7-segment displays have to behave differently. But now you can all do a lot of cool stuff, leverage really the possibilities of Mobiflight, and assign this logic to any of your joystick buttons or axes. So hopefully I can release this tomorrow. It's already available as a beta, as I already said. The next one, a little bit of history session now, Mobiflight in a nutshell. In 2013 is when I originally started out with Mobiflight, and it was in the first kind of iteration, it was only a personal project for me. I wanted to create something for myself, and I found Arduino boards, and then I kind of came up with the first version. And in 2016, I then decided to say, here, Mobiflight, that's an open source project of mine. I really want to put it out, and I want to also allow other people to have access to it. And now in 2021, we have around about 2,400 users per month that are using Mobiflight with their home cockpits, from ranges where they have just a set of buttons or LEDs or something very simple connected, up to installations where we have 20 Arduino boards connected to one Mobiflight instance that power an entire Boeing 737 home cockpit, the one from Helimac, as we have just seen on one of those pictures. So that's pretty impressive. And we have 5,700 users registered on our forum, and we have even 1,400 users now. I could update this. This is we broke the barrier of the 1,400 users that are registered on our Discord server. And it's also really, really cool. Really makes me proud that so many people have joined the community and are there, and they're helping each other. It's really, really awesome. My motivation to go for open source was that I really wanted that home cockpit building becomes accessible to everyone, because when I started out, especially the IO cards and all this stuff was very, very, very expensive, at least what I thought to my standards. And I wanted to create something really simple, leveraging open source. And I also wanted to, I started out with this idea that there's so many creative people on the flight sim community, because you can see that there's a lot of people building cool stuff and also work on scenery. And so there's a lot of knowledge out there. So I thought it would be nice to have a place where we can get all involved and also help me, because it's not my full-time job. Yeah, I have another full-time job, and this is simply really only my hobby. I do it in my spare time to get a little bit of development support. And open source is simply awesome. I wanted to try it out myself, and I really feel it was all worth it. But with these ingredients at this point, excuse me, at this point, the journey can now start for you and your home cockpit. Okay, we're now cleared. We're good to go. We have the basic and fundamental question answered. How do I connect all this stuff to my flight sim? Take the Arduinos, take Mobiflight, and then I bet once you get started, you actually won't stop, because it doesn't simply stop with a light panel. That's just like the beginning. And then you're going to get hooked up on it, and you're really going to like it. So you are going to need some cool tools, and open source, even like around all this, can also be very helpful, because you want to probably do some two-dimensional designs like I showed. If you think about the light switch panel that we had looked at earlier, all this can be designed in open source tools like Inkscape or GIMP. And then if you think about 3D modeling and computer-aided design, also for those things, we can find cool programs like FreeCAD and Blender and OpenSCAD that are open source tools that allow you to actually kind of design and plan and sketch out things, or even to model things that you want to manufacture, put together later. And this brings me to the next point. Open source build tools are not about software only, it's also even about hardware. And one of the most important things for me personally, like really groundbreaking, is 3D printers, because it unlocks so many, or like it allows you to create so many cool things that are needed in a home cockpit, from buttons to just little switch caps, or you can even you can also print entire panels with it. So we're going to look at this in a second. But RepRap was one of the first open source initiatives for 3D printers, and they became very, very famous, and others follows. And I can also see that CNC mills, which are really important or very handy to have in home cockpit building context, are going to be more open source. I'm going to do a little time check here. Awesome. I think we're good on time. Let's move on. 3D, the Ender 3D, the Ender 3 is also an open source printer. I just saw, I'm going to take a look at the other poll. Let me unlock my phone real quick. I asked this question, do you guys have a 3D printer? And 53 of you have answered, and 8 only have a 3D printer, and 45 say that they don't have one. So that's really interesting, because before we had 2/3 of the people of the audience saying, yeah, we do home cockpit building, or we have some devices, and only 20% actually have one, or 15%. I'm trying to do math in my head at the moment, but yeah, this is really something. $180, a very advanced tool, really, really cool, can be very, very creative with this stuff. So if you do not yourself know how to model, Thingiverse is a great place to start and look for flight sim stuff that others have modeled that you can actually print and create for yourself on a 3D printer. So this is also some form of open source. Not all the designs come with the source files, but many of them do. So that would also allow you to make modifications to it and print it then for yourself with these modified files. And I personally, for example, I have one of these Ender 3 printers, and this is what I print for myself. So those are individual panels. It's the radio stack. It's all driven by Mobiflight, of course. And yeah, everything is printed and designed with 3D computer aided with CAD tools. So it's really, really nice what possibilities this provides to us. And the learning curve is a little steep, but there's a lot of information and also very helpful people out there. This is another example from Muti on the Discord chat, who has put an FMC together for himself and printed the face front panels, like the panels that he needs, on a 3D printer. So that's really, really cool. I hope you can also see the benefit of this. Taking another topic, which is wiring. And well, if you put stuff together, you might actually end up with a picture like this. Yeah, so this is how sometimes wiring looks like when you have a lot of stuff on your panel, and then you kind of get practice and you do it a little bit more organized, and you can see that there is some ways to do this, to stack different cards on each other, put some nice labels on them, have nice routing, a cool cable wiring harness, and you can see that people become very creative. And one thing that we recently saw on our Discord server is that nowadays you can even take it to another level. Yeah, and that's really, really cool. So on this picture, what you can see is people start to manufacture their own PCBs, and they're so cheap to produce, and it's a lot of fun to create those and design those. And yeah, it's really amazing, and you use open source software for this. So another example where open source can really help you with your home cockpit building. Isn't that amazing? I mean, yeah, a lot of different ideas that you can start off. And also here, it doesn't have to be you who creates all this. On our community, for example, we're sharing all these designs, so you don't have to start from scratch. You can actually jump on top of you can jump on the train. You can reuse the work that others have created, because we all have this open source in mind. This brings me to the last kind of chapter of my talk, the last section. It's about contribution and collaboration. How can I support an open source project? Yeah, and it is by contributing, sorry. You can contribute to the code. Yeah, if you know how to code, you can go to Mobiflight on GitHub, and you can also share ideas. Yeah, you can also share your designs. as we do. That's really, really cool. The Mobiflight community, and that was not my idea, that was their idea. They started to put out all these templates. Like they created a repository of templates and designs for typical aircrafts. And now they're sharing these designs, and you just can take them, you can modify them, you can print them out, you can create them on a laser cutter or have them created on a laser cutter by somebody else. And they, like the level, the fidelity of these things, it's really amazing. It's so cool. But also like this idea that people say, hey, we work together on this and do this as a community effort. I find that's just mind-blowing. I really, I'm super proud of this initiative. And then another thing is ideas, yeah, that people are driving me to or come up with an idea, and they say, hey, why it would be so cool if I could use the joystick buttons on my joystick with Mobiflight. And in the beginning, I really didn't understand what is now Sergey was talking about when he proposed this, and it took me a while, and he explained it to me, and we thought about it, and we discussed the idea, and now I'm really I was so, of course, yeah, it does make sense. And as I just said earlier, now you will have it as a new Mobiflight feature. So that's another way of being involved or getting involved in an open source project. You can also collaborate. So all the community, everyone is super friendly. There's a forum, there's Discord. It's about helping each other when they have some trouble, when they are starting out with stuff, and also with sharing configurations, which means maybe someone built something and has a Mobiflight configuration, and then they share this Mobiflight configuration with each other so that another person doesn't have to do the job again. And that's really super cool, because this also now accumulates in this side project of Mobiflight. Configuration also is relevant for Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, because it's actually a little harder to do the interaction with the flight sim. I hope they're going to improve this, but at the moment we created a platform that is called Hub, where the community collects all the different instructions that it takes that have to be executed, so that if I flip a switch, that something correct happens in the airplane. And they're sharing this on this platform so that other people have it easier. They can look it up by using filters and then copy the settings over to Mobiflight, and it's super easy to configure for them. Yeah, then supporting open source, also where you can help is to promote these open source projects. You can talk about those on social media channels or like YouTube. You can also talk about those on Discord. If you are familiar with Discord, I believe Discord is a great tool, even though Discord, to my understanding, is not open source, but it's a great platform for open source communities, very interactive, and that's amazing. And if you want to go even a step further, you can financially support open source projects by donations through PayPal or Patreon. There's a myriad of different tools that maybe the open source project would work with. So look out for these things. If you believe this open source tool, open source software, open source hardware is really providing you a great service and kind of facilitates you things, and you really love to use it, then also consider financially supporting the project, because it's always good to back up and to be a backer, because there's always costs also for those who are spending their times in their free times on these initiatives. So with this being said, we have 7 minutes left. I hope you enjoyed all this information that I provided to you. My goal with this talk is to create awareness for open source in the context of home cockpit building. And I also want to make clear that you don't have to be intimidated by kind of this complexity in the beginning. There's a lot of cool stuff that you can reuse, which is shared by the community for the community. And yeah, if you want to really give it a try, just go for it. So at this point, I will take a look at the questions on the chat, and I will just read them one by one. I don't think that anyone okay, well, this kind of, so the first question is, with chip shortages and prices for cards going through the roof, I wonder if it's worth gathering talented sim enthusiasts to build a dedicated video card made exclusively for flight simulation and possibly racing and so on. Any ideas, pro or con? Well, I think that's a great question. And I also believe that I'm not really 100% knowledgeable or really into this so far. I just know that AMD and NVIDIA, who are working on this, they really have put a lot of effort into this, but I can totally see that people are smart enough, even if they don't work for NVIDIA or AMD, to create an open source version of such a capable video card. So I really love the idea. I think it would probably allow for also more competition if there were these designs out there. Right now, it's about this intellectual property thing. So I don't think that NVIDIA or AMD would be very thrilled about an open source competitor, but it would be definitely a really cool thing to do. There's another question. It says, I am a real newbie when it comes to 3D printing. So I'd like to get more understanding of what's available here and where to find open source specs for the components to be printed. Also, if I understand correctly, there are different standards for these e-drawings. Does that constrain which 3D printer to get? I think that's a fantastic question, or like there's actually two of them. So first of all, I already talked about Thingiverse. I also talked about Mobiflight as a community project. Of course, you can find a lot of models and a lot of designs out there on the internet for free so that you can start out printing those, because printing in itself is also hobby, requires a little bit of practice to get have successful prints. But definitely there's a lot of components out there that are also open source. And the second part of the question, I don't think that these e-drawings really constrain you which printer to get, but at the end, the slicer, which is a tool that converts the model to the actual printer code, they know all these different models. And yeah, so typically it should be possible to convert any 3D model that you find, almost any, into a format that the slicer can take, and then that the slicer, the G code that is then sent to the printer. So I don't think that you have to be worried about what printer exactly to get, just for a specific format. And then there's another question, thoughts on using the new small round displays with Raspberry Pis or Arduinos for individual panel instruments. I also believe that's really cool. I saw those. I saw them on AliExpress. They look really cool. They look like you can build gauges with them fairly easy. But I would also totally believe that Raspberry Pi and an Arduino can drive those. So yeah, that's something really, really cool. I would love to try it out, and I hopefully also will try it out soon. And the last one was making me a little worried, because it's saying, is there a presentation? So I hope you were able to see my presentation. I don't believe that it was not the case. I had the opportunity to do it with Jeremy together. So okay, at this point, we're really almost at the end. We have 2 minutes left, and I can, if you want, you can still go and post a quick question. I can still answer one at least. And if not, then I would just say we can also, is there a presentation at 8:05? Okay, well, I'm gonna say there was a nice presentation. It was really nice to having you. The last thing that I want to point out, if you want to give Mobiflight a try, go to mobiflight.com, download it there for free, and also be invited to join our Discord server, because it's really, really interactive. And if you want to get your feet wet and you have issues or questions in the beginning or whatever, any question at any time, you can always go there and get support by the community. So with this being said, I want to close it out. Thanks for having me here. Thanks for Ellen from the team who allowed me to be on this or have this talk. And I hope everyone is having a blast on site. And for anyone else who is remote like me, then stay safe and hope to see you soon somewhere on the community. Bye-bye.